Hello, my name is Mars, and welcome back to my Six Sad Library, Floor Edition. Today, I am going to go over the 2025 book releases that I am most excited to read at some point. Probably not this year, but definitely at some point. I have a very long list of books that I'm keeping an eye on, but for the sake of keeping this video manageable, I am only going over the top 20 or so most exciting to me. I am also going to go in chronological order of release date. So the first half of this video will be a lot of books that were released this quarter and thus are already out. And then the second half of this video will be books that are announced but have not been released yet. Without further ado, let's get into it. The first book on my list is We Do Not Part by Hong Kong, translated from Korean by Ye Won and Paige Anaya Morris. Released on January 21st by Penguin Random House under their Hogarth imprint. It was originally published in South Korea a couple years ago in 2021. This is a work of literary fiction about a woman who must brave a snowstorm to reach her friend's house on Jeju Island and rescue her pet bird. And the blurb says that she doesn't yet suspect the vertiginous plunge into the darkness that awaits her at her friend's house. I really enjoyed Hong Kong's book, The Vegetarian, which is probably what most people know her for. And I'm also planning on reading her book, The White Book. And this one also, this new release also seems very interesting. And I'm very intrigued by how kind of vague and mysterious the synopsis is. And I'm always a sucker for books that take place in an isolated setting or during like a blizzard or a storm of some sort. So this sounds right up my alley. Plus, I trust Kang to bring a very reflective and engaging writing style to the story. The next book on the list is Old Soul by Susan Barker. This one was released on January 28th by Penguin Random House through their G.P. Putnam Sons imprint. This one is a horror novel where two strangers meet at an airport, and as they discuss, they realize that both of their lives have been heavily impacted by the same mysterious woman. And one of the strangers decides to go on a quest to figure out what the deal with this mysterious strange woman is, and it takes him down a bit of a rabbit hole to meet various different people who have been affected by her over time. I am very interested in this one, first because the synopsis seems quite interesting, but also because I'm not immune to marketing gimmicks, and the publisher compares this to Under the Skin, which is a movie that I always think about, and things are not often compared to it. So I'm interested to read something else that is a bit similar to that, even if just a little bit. The next book on my list is one that I think is going to be quite popular, and that is The Lamb by Lucy Rose, which was released on February 4th by HarperCollins. This one is a folk horror novel about a girl who grows up on the edge of the woods with her mother. And her mother, it seems from the blurb, is a cannibal of some sort. And the daughter goes along with this until a stranger visits their cottage and starts calling the mother-daughter dynamic into question for the daughter. And things escalate from there. I am a huge fan of anything folk horror, and I'm always happy to see new folk horror stories published. I especially want to give this one a try because I did the first page test to see if the writing style was my vibe, and the very first sentence is extremely enticing. It goes, "On my fourth birthday, I plucked six severed fingers from the shower drain." And I actually didn't read anything beyond that because immediately from that first sentence, I knew this was something that I wanted to go into without knowing very much about it. So yeah, that is The Lamb. The next book on the list is House of Fury by Evelio Rosero, translated from Spanish by Victor Meadowcroft. It was released on February 4th by New Directions Press, and it was originally published in Colombia in 2021, as far as I can tell. This one is a piece of literary historical fiction which takes place entirely over the course of one night, where a well-off family hosts a party that descends into violence and chaos after various surprises and disasters. I very much like things that take place over a short span of time, like just one night or just one day. And I especially like reading things or watching things that show a descent into chaos of a group of people. This one also seems to have some interesting political commentary involved that I am very intrigued by, and I trust New Directions to select titles that are, even if not my favorite thing, at least interesting. So I'm definitely going to give this one a try. All right, the next one on the list is Death Takes Me by Cristina Rivera Garza, translated from Spanish by Robin Myers and Sarah Booker, and released on February 25th by Penguin Random House under their Hogarth imprint. It was originally published in Mexico in 2007, so about a decade ago. This one is a literary mystery about a professor and a detective who become obsessed with a string of serial murders wherein many men's corpses are turning up castrated and alongside slips of paper with pieces of poetry on them. This seems to be some kind of work of metafiction, as the main character's name is also Cristina Rivera Garza, and that's something that I think can be very interesting and cool when it's done well, such as in the works of Kurt Vonnegut or in A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. So I'm interested to see how that's executed. I also have long been interested in trying out some of Garza's work, especially the Elliott crest. I haven't had the chance to yet, but I think that it seems the way that she approaches topics like violence and gender is quite interesting and something that I might be interested in. So this is definitely going on to my list of things to check out at some point. All right, the next one on the list is The Unworthy by Agustina Bazterrica, translated from Spanish by Sarah Moses. This was released on March 4th by Simon and Schuster under the Scribner imprint, and it was originally published in Argentina in 2023. This is another one that I think is going to be very popular, if only because the author's previous books, Tender is the Flesh and 19 Claws and a Blackbird, I think it's called, have also gone viral. And this one is a dystopian horror novel about a woman who occupies the lowest rank in a convent run by a highly controlling fictional religious group, the Sacred Sisterhood. And she aims to become one of the highest ranking members of this organization while the world ends outside of their convent. I actually have not read any of Bastrica's other work, but I'm extremely intrigued by her brand of horror, which seems to be very intense and gross while also being thoughtful, as far as I can tell from how people talk about it. This one is particularly interesting to me because I love when horror and dystopia are blended together, and I also love anything having to do with religion, convents, nuns in particular is very enticing to me, and religious horror is just a genre that I can never get enough of. So that is something that I definitely plan to read and will probably be my first entry into this author's work. The next book on the list is Rekt by Alex Gonzalez, published on March 25th by Kensington Books through their Erewhon imprint. This is a, I think, sci-fi horror novel about a man who is sent a snuff film of his wife's tragic accidental death. And after this, he goes down a path of exploring the dark web and the mysterious figures who populate it, and things get more dangerous and more unhinged as he continues his descent into the deep web. I am intrigued, but also a bit skeptical about this. I've always liked the idea of literature or films that kind of do internet horror because I think there's a lot of things that are quite interesting and eerie about the internet as a concept and as something that we live alongside every single day, but I rarely see it done well. I think this one could do it well from the little bit that I read of the first page, but I will only know after I give it a try, which is why I plan on doing so. The next book on the list is Sky Daddy by Kate Folk, released on April 8th by Penguin Random House. This one is a piece of literary fiction about a woman who is sexually obsessed with airplanes and the length she will go to achieve her dream relationship. I've really enjoyed Kate Folk's short story collection Out There, which has a lot of quite strange and unhinged characters and themes like this story seems to cover. And I really enjoy stories about characters who have strange obsessions, fetishes, and things like that. So this is right up my alley. I will say, I hope folk leans into the weirdness of the premise because sometimes I've noticed in recent literary fiction that things are marketed as being weird, or there's focus on one strange part of the premise, but then you read it and it's just a basic book about self-discovery or something like that. I want this to get weird. I trust folk to do it, but I will only know if she does after reading it. The next book on the list is Big Chief by John Hickey, released on April 8th by Simon and Schuster. This one is a literary novel following an Anishinaabe man who helps run the Passage Rouge nation's government and their casino. He is deeply involved in an election that is ongoing, which then slides into some pretty chaotic familial and political conflict after a tragic accident strikes. I often find myself enjoying and being intrigued by political fiction that I read more than I expect myself to be. So I'm trying to be a bit more proactive and actually select things that fall under that on purpose to read because it does seem to be something I enjoy. And this one in particular, as with House of Fury, seems to have that kind of descent into chaos in a small community thing going for it, which I do love. So that is something that I will be giving a try. Next, we have Vanishing World by Sayaka Murata, translated from Japanese by Jinni Tapley Takemori. It will be released on April 15th by Grove Press. It was originally published in Japan in 2015. This is a work of speculative fiction about a near future that relies entirely on artificial insemination and where sex has become taboo. And the main character of the book is very disgusted with herself because she realizes that she was actually conceived through copulation and she herself has sexual desires which she sees as strange and impure. So she ends up moving to a new experimental community with her husband in hopes that it will purify her of these impulses. So I'm often a bit wary of fiction that deals with kind of reproductive focused dystopias, if only because while I often like disturbing content around pregnancy and birth is one of the few things that I kind of struggle to get into the right mindset for. But I trust Murata to approach it with a small dose of dark humor, and I also really loved her book Convenience Store Woman, and I think that she does a really good job of rendering characters who feel othered and alienated by the world that they live in. So I'm guessing that this book will have a bit more focus on that aspect of it rather than the pregnancy aspect of it, and I am willing to give it a try because I trust this author to handle the story well. The next book on the list is Hellions by Julia Elliott, which will be released on April 15th by Tin House. This one is a collection of Gothic short stories. Some of the subjects featured include a nun and a mystical manuscript, a pet alligator, a family obsessed with the film The Exorcist, children mysteriously acquiring new supernatural abilities, and a power struggle between a shapeshifter and a sorceress. And every single one of those concepts is something that I want to read immediately as soon as possible. Another thing that intrigues me about this is that Jeff Vandermeer blurbed it, calling the stories beautiful, visceral, surprising, both wild and dangerous, with a southern twang but universal appeal. Elliott is an Angela Carter for our times. Blurbs don't always mean much to me in comparisons to Angela Carter, who is one of my favorite authors, often are a bit misleading, but Vandermeer is the rare author that I trust because he kind of makes it his whole thing to champion weird horror and people who write in that genre. And I think he often puts authors and works in the spotlight that do deserve to be there. So he's one of the rare authors whose blurbs I trust. And I think if he's comparing this to Angela Carter, he means it. So I'm very excited to pick this one up. The next book on the list is The Honditsch Cross by Ingeborg Bachmann. This is translated from German by Tess Lewis. It will be released on April 29th by New Directions, though it was originally published in Austria in 1983. This is a historical novella written by the author when she was around 18 years old. It's set in 1813 Austria and follows a theology student who returns to his family home only to find that troops from the Napoleonic occupation have stationed themselves at his family's house and are raising hell for his community. So Bachmann's novel Melina, oh, this one right here is actually one of my favorite books of all time. I This kind of rewired my brain in a way, and especially the way that I approach the use of language and words themselves. The way she uses words is very unique and kind of challenging, but ultimately quite rewarding. And she's one of those authors that is a 20th century female literary figure who was kind of lost to time and is only recently finding a resurgence and appreciation in the English language. So I'm very excited to be seeing more of her work published in English. And this one in particular will be very interesting to read to see how she started out as a writer and how she developed. I am very excited for this one. The next book on the list is The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling, which will be released on May 20th by Harper Voyager. This one is a fantasy horror novel about a besieged castle that receives salvation from the mysterious Constant Lady and her saints, who then influence the siege's survivors to take part in strange hedonistic rituals. The novel follows three women, a war hero, a sorceress, and a servant, and their attempts to unravel the true intentions behind the Constant Lady. So I've actually never read any of Caitlin Starling's other work, and in fact, I've actually heard mixed things about her writing from friends whose taste and opinions I trust. However, no matter what anyone says, I don't think anyone could keep me from reading this one just because it has so much that I am interested in and love to read about, everything from being set in medieval times to kind of having religious horror in it, a nun motif, all sorts of stuff that I very much want to read. So I will definitely be giving this one a shot. The next nonfiction title I'm excited for is Decolonizing Language and Other Revolutionary Ideas by Ngugi Thiong'o, to be released in May by the New Press. It's an essay collection from a renowned classic novelist as well as post-colonial theorist, and it explores his various ideas surrounding language and writing and resistance, and in particular, his idea that African languages and the use and revitalizing of them can be a kind of revolutionary effort against colonial forces and the impact that colonialism has had on people's psyches. I always really enjoyed reading texts in college that were works of literary criticism that also talked about a lot of political ideas, such as ones around colonialism. I think it's very important to explore the relationships between language and politics and cultural identity and all the many other things that go into that. I'm very excited to see a full-length work being published on the topic. And it seems like this is actually a great year in general for works about language being published. I'm not going to go in depth on them, but there's also Exophony by Yoko Tawada and Speaking in Tongues by J.M. Kotze and Mariana Dimopoulos to look forward to. So yeah, a great year to read about language, and that's very exciting to me. The next book on the list is We Are Green and Trembling by Gabriela Cabezon Camara. This is translated from Spanish by Robin Myers, and it will be released on June 3rd by New Directions. This is a work of satirical, surrealist historical fiction set during the colonization of South America, and it is about a real-life historical figure, Antonio de Arauso, who was raised to be a nun but escaped and lived his life as a man. This reimagining of his life story follows his adventures in the rainforests of the New World as he seeks to avoid the army he deserted and protect the two indigenous girls that he took into his care. I am very intrigued by this. I had never heard of De Erauso before I read this synopsis, so I did a bit of light research on him. And what an interesting historical figure and a very cool starting point to draw inspiration from a story. So I'm really excited to dig into this. I love surrealism and I love a good historical reimagining, so I'm quite excited for this one. The next book is the one that I am most excited for and that I will probably pick up immediately, even though I don't usually do that with new releases, and that is Killing Stella by Marlon Haushofer, translated from German by Sean Whiteside. It will be released on July 1st by New Directions, though it was originally released in Austria in 1958, making it the oldest book on this list. It's a literary novella about a woman who is left alone while her family goes on a weekend trip to ponder the dysfunction of her family and how it was all made worse by the introduction of her friend's teenage daughter, Stella. The blurb goes on to describe it as a domestic horror story that builds into an apocalyptic ending and distills many of the themes of her acclaimed novel, The Wall, into a claustrophobic, gothic, shattering novella. The Wall is one of my favorite books of all time. And when I say one of my favorite books of all time, I mean it's in like the top three. This had a really profound impact on me. But like Ingeborg Bachmann from earlier, Marlon Haushofer is one of those female authors of the 20th century who kind of got lost to time and is only recently getting acclaim in the English language world and having her works republished and things like that. And so for a while, a couple of years, this is the only thing available from her to read in English. And I'm very excited to get another piece of work from her. If it's even anything slightly like The Wall, I just know I'm going to love it. So this one's definitely the one I'm most excited for. I think in terms of excitement, this next one actually comes into a close second to Killing Stella, and that is The Stone Door by Leonora Carrington, which will be released on July 15th by New York Review of Books Classics. It was originally published in 1977, but has been out of print since then. This is a surrealist classic told through many layers involving various occult themes and concepts, settings from ancient Mesopotamia to Transylvania, and the synopsis also claims that this book argues for the unification of the male and the female as a means of liberating the human race. I'm not 100% sure what this means in the context of the book, but it sounds interesting, and I'm excited to learn more. Carrington is actually someone that I know best as a visual artist. I have read one of her short stories. I believe it was The Debutante, and I really enjoyed it. But mostly, I love her for her paintings. I think that she's one of my all-time favorite artists, alongside Hilma af Klint and Remedios Varo. Funnily enough, she was actually friends with the latter, and I have always been enamored with the occult and fantastical themes of her artwork. So I'm excited to read a novel that dives into these things. I do apologize if it seems that I have a greater focus on here for older books that are being translated or reprinted this year as opposed to brand new books. But that's simply what I tend to be most interested in. So, yes, that is another one that I am looking forward to. And speaking of reprints, the next one I'm looking forward to is Enemy of the Sun, Poetry of Palestinian Resistance, edited by Nasir Hassan Aruri and Edmund Garib, to be released on July 15th by Seven Stories Press. This one was originally published in 1970, but is being released as an updated version with new poems added. This is an anthology of poems from Palestinian writers, obviously, in resistance to and commentary of the Israeli occupation, apartheid, and genocide. Back in the 70s, when it was originally published here, it was released by the Student to Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was a prominent organization in the civil rights movement, interestingly enough. And it was an expression of solidarity between oppressed peoples in America and Palestine, as well as other places like Vietnam and South Africa. So I have been reading and listened to readings of a lot of Palestinian poetry over the past couple of years for obvious reasons, and I really appreciate that this is being reprinted. The original printing of this, I cannot find it at any bookstores or any of my local libraries, so it's nice to get a reprint of this to make it more available for people, along with additional texts, which is very exciting. And I think this resistance poetry, I've read some of the stuff that I think is in here, judging from table of contents that I've found on Internet Archive. It's some profound pieces of work that really deserve to be shared and disseminated as much as humanly possible for the artistry and resilience that they contain and the inspiration that they promote for overcoming colonization in all of its forms. I'm really excited for this one. I'm glad it's getting a reprint. And the next one is actually a newer one that is The Dance and the Fire by David Saldana Paris, translated from Spanish by Cristina Maxwini. It will be released on July 29th by Catapult, and it was originally published in Mexico in 2021. So this is a literary novel following three friends who, throughout their adolescence, were entangled in a very complicated love triangle. So they parted ways and are only recently reuniting in their home city, where they find it ravaged by wildfires, and soon one of the friends accidentally triggers a bit of a dancing plague in the town. So that is what caught my attention the most. I have a bit of a hyperfixation, special interest relationship with mass hysteria as a phenomenon. It may sound weird to say, but the dancing plague of 1518 is one of my favorite historical topics or events. Maybe that's not the right word. I find it one of the most interesting. And anything that involves mass hysteria, and especially that seems inspired by the Dancing Plague of 1518, is something that I'm going to pick up for sure. Okay, next we have The Hounding by Zenobi Purvis to be released on August 5th by Macmillan through their Henry Holt and Company imprint. This is a historical novel set in a small English village following a clan of five sisters who are kind of outcasts in their community, and they start being accused by their neighbors of turning into dogs. As I mentioned when talking about The Dance in the Fire, I'm extremely intrigued by mass hysteria, of which witchcraft accusations falls under that category, and the witch trials and such are all very interesting topics to me. This one I am a bit hesitant on because if it goes the direction of actually having the girls be weirdos who maybe do a little bit of fantastical witchcraft shenanigans, I think I'm going to love this. But if it's purely historical fiction and nobody actually turns into a dog, it may just be fine for me. So we'll see. This is one that I might wait and look at other people's reviews for to tell if it's something that is actually up my alley. The next book I want to talk about is The Macabre by Kosako Jackson to be released on September 9th by Harper Voyager. This one has a very interesting sounding plot. It is a horror novel about a painter who makes some disturbing discoveries about his grandfather's artwork. He apparently had a series of 10 paintings that have some ulterior motives beyond just being artwork, and he is asked to track down and destroy all 10 of these paintings and goes on a very dangerous, wild quest to find the very last one. And by the way, it seems like he has the power to enter into paintings. So I believe Jackson actually normally writes young adult horror and adult romance, and this will be his first foray into adult horror writing. I often have not had good experiences with authors making this kind of genre leap, but the plot of this one just seems too interesting to ignore. It also, I think I have a bias because it reminds me of an adult, more dark and creepy version of a children's series that I loved growing up called The Books of Elsewhere. So if it is like a scarier adult version of that, I think I'm really gonna fall in love with it. Okay, the very last book on my list is Good and Evil and Other Stories by Samantha Schweblin, translated from Spanish by Megan McDowell, to be released on September 16th by Penguin Random House through their Not Doubleday division. It was originally published in Argentina just earlier this year, so quite a quick turnaround on this one. It is a collection of 6 short stories which explore a variety of topics and tend to fall into the genre of magical realism and psychological fiction. I absolutely adore Schweblin's short story collection, Mouthful of Birds. I find that these are very memorable and things that I return to often to reread, almost like a book of fairy tales or scary stories to tell in the dark. So another short story collection from her is definitely something that I want to read, and I'm very excited that she seems to be popular enough to have her books translated so quickly so that I can read them sooner. All right, so those are the books that I am most interested in reading this year. Let me know if you are also excited for any of these books, or if it comes to the ones that have already been released from the first portion of this video, if you've read them and if they actually are as good as they seem. And then if it seems like there's anything missing from this list, like the vibe of this list seems like it would fit another upcoming book that you can think of, go ahead and shout that one out as well, and I may add it to my personal list of things to look out for. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.